morning, everyone. We'll continue with the video format today because I think in the last couple posts I've seen how useful it is to impart some of these ideas to people, to give different examples, and to really sort of engage in the ideas. Interestingly, some philosophers, I think, wrote a lot in their lives. I think Aristotle spent a lot of time collecting things and then wrote some treatises or dictated to others, but others didn't. Socrates never wrote anything, and he talked with people, had dialogues, which Plato later subscribed or wrote down. So I think philosophy and basically everything we're talking about here, there are probably situations where it's best to impart the ideas through writing, but there's many situations where it's probably easier to just discuss them in a lecture format or in a talk format. And I really don't want this to be a lecture. This is really sort of a presentation of ideas that are meaningful to everyone's life. This isn't really school. While we're certainly looking at a lot of texts that would be looked at school or in universities, we're really doing it for more of a sense of creating a self and creating a person that everyone will want to be for the rest of their lives. A person that you can say that is someone that's formed appropriately through engagement with some of the best ideas that have ever been produced, and that has taken those ideas seriously, engaged them, and taken all that and constructed a self. So while I guess this might seem like a lecture, it's really not, and it's really more of just a presentation of ideas about how to construct a self. So today we're going to talk about an issue that's pretty important. Again, I think everything we talk about here is fairly important. But the issue today is basically how is it that how is it that you're going to go about making decisions in the world? What is it to make a good decision, and what does it mean to make a bad decision? And of course, that's what life is all about: making decisions and weighing alternatives, weighing evidence, weighing facts, using all of that to make some decision that's rational and that's good for you. Now, again, as we've talked about, all of this may be very far from sort of the ideal of what decisions are like in day-to-day life, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to at least learn what the ideal account would be, and to measure how far you are sort of failing to live up to that ideal. We may realize that many of our decisions fail to live up to that ideal, but that itself isn't really a reason to sort of say, well, forget about considering the ideal account. Let's just go about doing what's easiest, or what we're doing right now. And again, if that's what we're interested in, we don't need to read these texts. We don't need to engage in philosophy to do what we're doing right now. We can continue to do that. We don't need to spend any time in any of these kinds of things. So if the only reason we would read these works and consider philosophy is if we want some sort of improvement in our life, if we want a better way of being, if we want to make better decisions. So in that sense, I guess it's important to just realize at the outset that we sort of consider ideals of how to live so that we can at least aim at them in life, even if we fall short, because we'll still be better off, or so that would be the thought. So today, as we talked about, we're going to discuss how is it that we can make the right decision. And we're going to look at, for some guidance, John Dewey's work called How We Think. And this is, again, John Dewey is, again, another American psychologist and philosopher, wrote a lot on education. And his ideas are, I think, considered within the school of pragmatism. So they're very they're very realistic, and they're very pragmatic, to use the tautology. But what he says here as to he has some really great insights here that we should look at, and he basically lays it out pretty quickly. He says, what are the alternatives, in making a decision? What is it that you can you have to make decisions. I mean, we saw that in Aristotle. You can't just sleep all your life and do nothing. So you have to act in life. And so, what are the how are you going to make your decisions in life? And Dewey lays it out pretty quickly. He says in a passage here that basically, if you're presented with a road and two alternatives, he asks, which road is right? How shall perplexity be resolved? And he says, but basically, there's two alternatives. You can either blindly and arbitrarily take one course, trusting to luck that your decision has been correct, or you can try to discover grounds for which road is right. So that's sort of the two approaches. Do what you think is right based on some sort of inquiry as to for some sort of basis for your decision, or just blindly and arbitrarily take one course and hope for the best. That's sort of the key. When you blindly or arbitrarily do something, you're just hoping that things turn out right. But and you're not really so fortified in your basis for your opinion, but you're just hoping for the best. Whereas when you ground your decision in some sort of factual, rational consideration, you have hope that your reasons are right, and you have strengthened that your reasons that you pursued were the correct ones. So that's sort of the dichotomy right away. And he says, I don't think there's really any discussion that there's another alternative. I mean, you either figure out what to do based on sort of instinct or something arbitrary, or you try to think about it. I just can't think, or passion. I just can't think of another approach. I might be wrong here, but and it could be a blended approach, of course, using both. But that seems to be part of the challenge right there. He says now which way is better. So obviously that's sort of, we've laid out the alternatives. What's the better approach here? Is it following your passion, doing things arbitrarily, or is it thinking things through and looking for reasons? And I think Dewey, throughout the book, How We Think, he gives us many reasons for why it's better to think and it's better to seek reasons and facts. He says that turning to these thoughts, he says genuine freedom is always intellectual. You're free to the extent that you are trained in the right way of thinking about things, right way to, he says, turn things over in your mind, to look at matters deliberately, to judge whether the amount and kind of evidence required for a decision is available to you. And if not, if you feel like you don't have that kind of amount and kind of evidence, to go and look for such evidence and to know where to look. That, he says, is the only true freedom. He says basically that when you act based on sort of a purely impulsive or routine, when you're not thinking about the decision, or you're moved by your instincts and appetites, and you're sort of pushed from behind, which is a great expression he uses there. That it's not really you acting; you're being pushed in some sense by something that's outside of you. It's not coming from your rational self, which is the only self that can give you freedom. Again, these might be ideas that people disagree with, but these are at least what Dewey is saying here as to what is the right way to act. Or actually, sorry, in this sense, what is not the best alternative here in terms of making decisions. He says, getting back to why he thinks it's better to think things over, he says to turn things over in the mind, to reflect, means to hunt for additional evidence. for new data, to look for the easiest way. The easiest way is to just accept any suggestion that comes forward. That seems plausible, and to bring to an end what he calls the condition of mental uneasiness. And he says basically most people sort of they don't want to go about looking for more evidence or more data because it's just easier to just sort of do whatever seems right at the time and to end the mental uneasiness period. And he says a lot of sort of what is it that makes someone a thinker is to be able to remain in a state of uneasiness for a while the person is sort of gathering the facts and the evidence and weighing things. It's that sort of calm and it's that sort of poise that can allow someone to just remain somewhere, to stand unmoved while the impulses or the passions are pushing you in one direction, and say, I'm going to take my time, I'm going to consider evidence, I'm going to search for facts, and only then am I going to act. And so that is sort of the challenge, is that he's very clear about that. He says that to sort of reflective thinking in this sense involves a willingness to endure a condition of mental unrest and disturbance. So it's not necessarily sort of a nirvana state at all. It's considering different ideas, taking them seriously, and waiting in a time when it might be somewhat painful to think about different alternatives. But the hope is, again, that over the course of a life, over the longer-term period, this kind of short-term mental uneasiness and disturbance is going to, over the long run, give you much more freedom, develop you as a human being much more, and allow you to live a much better sort of life than if you had sort of tried to avoid or run from this sort of temporary or short-term uneasiness and unrest. He goes on again to say that the type of thought and the type of reflection that he's talking about is one where you're not just considering ideas that are coming forward to you or facts, but that there's always a smooth progression here. He says there's a consecutive ordering in which each sort of idea is sort of the step to the next idea, and then he says it's each term of thought leaves a deposit which is utilized in the next term. So it's not just this like mix of ideas that you don't really know how to deal with, but it's that you're taking each thought one by one, absorbing it, adding to it where appropriate, and building on it, and there's a smooth connection here. Again, I think we've talked about this in some of the other posts, where we talked about, for example, in Plato's Republic, that the tyrant, he's sort of getting these impulses, and he's moved in this way and that way because he's driven by his passions, but there's no smooth flow to his life because he's just reacting to his different passions. I think Dewey here is saying the same thing, that this sort of reflective thought where ideas, facts, evidence build on each other, there's a flow. This is the sort of thing we should be aiming for. And so I think we've gotten a pretty good sense of where Dewey's preferences in terms of how to make decisions. He says basically that part of the whole task of education is, again, not, as we've seen in some of the other posts, it's not just to impart scientific knowledge or skills or rules that can be applied, but is to give people this sense of how to cultivate these sort of habits. He calls it deep-seated and effective habits of discriminating tested beliefs from mere assertions, guesses, and opinions, to develop a lively, sincere, and open-minded preference for conclusions that are properly grounded, and to ingrain into the individual's working habits methods of inquiry and reasoning appropriate to the various problems that present themselves. So again, education should give you that discernment and ability to again, know when you should be moved and when you should not be moved. Give you that sense of lively, sincere preference for thoughts and ideas that are grounded in things that are solid, that you can accept, that make sense to you. That you would love those ideas, and you would love that way of being, and you wouldn't like different ways of approaching thinking and problems in your life. So again, that's something that Dewey thinks is what we can get from education. Um, so I think we've sort of laid out, again, why he prefers this way of making decisions. Just to further sort of particularize it, I can see some people thinking, okay, well, this sounds great, consider every fact, look, search. But boy, we're in the world, we got to make decisions. Who has time for all this? Who has time to, how can we even get every fact? Well, he says you don't have to consider every alternative. The sort of part of the whole project of being a wise person is to, know that there's a balance here between paucity and redundancy of ideas. That there isn't, every idea doesn't have to be pursued. You can sort of narrow in on sort of the leading ideas. I think Aristotle says this too in his Ethics. He says, everyone in the world has an idea of what is the best way of life. And of course, if someone was to go around asking every person in the world, that would be your whole life. So you can't do that. So I guess you have to sort of consider, or in your own mind, figure out where are the best ideas coming from. Who are the people that are most likely to have well-grounded ideas on these points? What is it that they've said, or in your interactions with them, have they sort of exhibited the kind of judgment that you would think this is someone that ideas are well-grounded? This is someone that I want to listen to more intensely, or is this someone that their ideas are just a reflection of their hunches and speculation, but there's really no wisdom there. So in that sense, we can sort of limit our fact gathering to sort of trusted sources, I guess. And there's also, again, a practicality component that you don't have to look at everything because it's not possible. He also says it's important to bear down on each idea and to take each idea seriously, but not to bear down too much. He says concentration does not mean fixity, nor a camped arrest or paralysis of the flow of suggestion. It means variety and change of ideas combined into a single steady trend moving toward a unified conclusion. That's really a wonderful formula there. So he says, when you're considering different ideas, it's important to bear down, but not to sort of stay paralyzed in any idea, because then you're not free. You're just paralyzed with the idea. So it's important to have a nice variety of ideas, but the variety is always trending again smoothly towards some sort of unified conclusion where you can make your decision. So I think he sort of particularizes it pretty well and probably staves off some sort of objections that people would normally have to what he's saying. So I guess at this point, people would think, okay, so we're talking about the best way to make a decision. We've sort of laid out what is that is preferred and what's the preferred alternative, how to make the decision. And so how is it that we can, what is it that we can do to sort of incline us toward the better alternative? What is it that, what causes people in the world, and on a very practical level? Again, we've talked about this, about it's really easy to say, be rational or be good, but it's or make wise decisions, or seek out facts and make wise decisions. It's really easy to say that, but then the person receiving that idea, what have they really been told? How have they been pushed to take that idea seriously? Even if they are pushed to take that idea seriously, what does it mean to take that idea seriously? How can they go about doing that? And of course, some of it, again, I think Aristotle said this too, that a lot of it is, in ethics and in these kinds of subjects, you can't expect mathematical precision. So the person that receives the idea has to take it in and apply it in his own way. And so there's always going to be that guesswork in it, and that rational, not guesswork, but rational best guess. And so there isn't any sort of mathematical answer here. But still, why? What would it mean for someone to really want to make more rational decisions, and what does it require? And here, I think Dewey is really clear on this point. He says it's all about being curious. That is what's going to draw someone in one direction or the other, and I think that's probably very, very true from my perspective. If you are always curious as to new ideas, if you are always curious as to new facts, if you don't think you've learned everything, if you think that the world has much more to teach you, if you think that great thinkers like Dewey or Plato or Rousseau or whoever thought about these issues very intensely, and there's a lot there for you to at least consider, not absorb and wholesale, but at least consider, and you're curious as to what are the different answers on these big questions. What have people said about it? Then you're going to be more driven toward the kinds of decision making that he's saying is preferred, the rational. So he says the curious mind is constantly alert, constantly exploring, seeking material for thought as a vigorous and healthy body would for nutriment. That's an interesting image there. Think about someone that's intensely interested in getting fit and eating correctly, sort of desire they show for that activity. Think about that in terms of a rational person that's pursuing reasons for his decisions and good ideas to pursue things, and other ideas, sort of leaving alone ideas that he doesn't think are well-grounded, sort of that drive, which he talks about here. Eagerness for experience, for new and varied contacts is found where wonder is found. Such curiosity is the only sure guarantee of the acquisition of the primary facts upon which inference must base itself. Eagerness for experience, again, is found where wonder is found. He says it's the only sure guarantee that someone will be driven to get these primary facts to make the right decision. So again, wonder, curiosity. Does he think it's rare? Does he think most people have this? No. And he, again, lays out some interesting ideas for what can prevent us from having that, which is, again, useful to think about what are the states of mind, what are the habits that will allow us to pursue a certain life and not pursue another form of life. He says curiosity is rare, and it is easily dulled and blunted. This is worth quoting here. Some lose it in indifference or carelessness, others in a frivolous flippancy. Many escape these evils only to become encased in a hard dogmatism which is equally fatal to the spirit of wonder. Some are so taken up with routine as to be inaccessible to new facts and problems. Others retain curiosity only with reference to what concerns their personal advantage in their chosen career. With many, curiosity is arrested on the plane of interest in local gossip and in the fortunes of their neighbors, basically describing most people most of the time here. Frivolous flippancy. What's the point of education? What's the point of being wise? Everything is random. There's no hope for anything. Indifference or carelessness, basically not caring about seeking facts and evidence, just hoping for the best. Hard dogmatism, that's on the other side. You already think you figured things out. You don't think you need anyone to tell you anything. That'll basically blunt the spirit of wonder, he says. Being so taken up with routine, that's very interesting there, as to be inaccessible to new facts and problems. Again, habitual life that's sort of grinding away in certain ways, not open to new ideas or facts or problems, but just sort of almost like a machine going through things repetitively. And he said that's also going to really blunt your sense of wonder at the world. He says others, they do have curiosity, but this is interesting. It's an interesting thought, but it's limited. It's very limited to a certain subsection of experience. He says Others retain curiosity only with reference to what concerns their personal advantage in a career and what sort of their neighbors, how people around them are doing. It's very interesting. It's a very powerful observation. That this, it's silly to say that people have lost all curiosity. Obviously, they have curiosity, but what are they curious about? What's on their mind? What is on your mind? What's on my mind? What's on everyone's mind? And of course, there's curiosity, but is it so narrow as to one or two things that you're just missing out on so much else that could give you the right sort of wonder to then go about making better decisions in your life on a whole range of things. So, of course, your decisions in your life are not going to be strictly with regard to how your neighbors are doing, local gossip, or your career. So, if you're only curious in those areas, you won't have developed the facts and insight and observations to make decisions that are good outside of that area. So that's a very interesting idea there too. I guess we've laid out a lot of what Dewey has said here. I guess some reactions here that could be helpful for everyone would be, it's interesting that in some ways what Dewey's saying about seeking facts and making rational decisions is definitely in some ways pursued by people with regard to things like where to get, where to eat tonight, where to go to a restaurant, where to shop, where to deposit, or where to get a credit card that offers the best rewards. I think a lot of people do have that sort of searching inquiry. You look on things like Yelp or things. There's a lot of fact gathering that goes on vacations, where to go. I think people do adopt that mentality on a certain range of things. But when it gets to more larger life decisions, it almost seems like people lose hope that there can be that same searching inquiry applied in that for fact gathering and well-grounded decisions in terms of bigger decisions like what to do, who to be with. Those areas that's sort of mysterious and perhaps for good reason. There's always a good reason for a certain view of experience because someone is having that experience. We'll talk about this more in the humility post, but it's not people don't just think certain things for no reason whatsoever. There's something that they experience, maybe very narrow, but something they experience that makes them think a certain way about something. And but it's an incomplete picture usually. So in this sense, it's just interesting to note that people do, in some sense, I think, use this sort of inquiry method with regard to sort of what we would call day-to-day decisions of economics or shopping or just how to go about doing very practical things. But it's not really applied in terms of grander decisions in one's life. It doesn't seem to be. And so that's sort of one observation I had. Next thing is there's probably a lot of truth to what Dewey's saying about better decisions and more well-grounded decisions, more factual decisions, decisions that are more that you feel more confident in because you've amassed better reasons for doing something. But I don't think he says it, and I don't think it's right to say any decision can ever be perfect, because you're always going to be, for two reasons. You always could miss certain facts. No one's perfect, and when you're gathering the facts or the reasons, you could be blinded to something. The fact that you could not know the fact at the time. No one may know the fact at the time. So the facts change over time. Some things that seemed right at some point now are wrong. So there's really a sense in which the perfect decision is never. You can't have a theoretically perfect decision. You can't ever act in the world based on a decision that's had every single fact included within the decision that should have been included. It's just impossible, because it's just not, a human being cannot know every fact that should bear on a decision, A, and know those facts correctly, B. in making decisions. So every decision in some sense is going to fall short of perfection. That there seems hardly any doubt on that. Another thing is that when you're gathering facts, of course, the person, a self, one person in the world, his knowledge of facts and experience is limited to what he knows. And of course, Dewey has said, search out, look for other reasons, look for other facts. And so, in that sense, you can continue to add reasons and facts, but to the extent you're relying on other people, well, the facts and reasons and justifications of what you're searching for is only as good as whatever the credibility of the person that told you that thing is. So, just to give you an example, if you're relying on, someone like me to teach you or to talk to you about Plato or Aristotle, well, that's, the ideas that you form based on Plato and Aristotle's thoughts, they're only as good as my reading of those. That's why I've always encouraged people to look at every text and to the extent they can, and to consider them and not just rely on what I'm saying, and to read things themselves. Because if you're relying on me, then again, to the extent that my interpretations are wrong or I'm reading texts the wrong way based on my own ideas and preconceptions, then you're going to get your ideas will be similarly wrong. So there is always a trust and component to it that you can't go beyond. Again, if you look for some article, you pull up some article on Yahoo News or the New York Times, and you're relying on that as a piece of information to make your decision. Again, it's only as good as the New York Times author that wrote it and his biases and his fact gathering. Hopefully, you can realize that by reading the article, or you can be aware of certain deficiencies. But again, it's limited. You have to rely on the good and bad of the person that's giving you the opinion. What does I guess I want to end by saying what I really agree with here, though, is again that curiosity component. It does seem like Dewey really hit on a point here that should not at all be discounted or minimized. I think both his description of what kills curiosity in the world and also his description of why curiosity is so important seems so dead on in terms of what it is that drives certain minds forward and seeking decisions, and seeking to make better decisions, and as a way of life, seeking to make more well-grounded decisions that are based on more and more things. For someone that's not interested in doing that, he seems to have really, I think, accurately diagnosed the issue there, and also accurately diagnosed the problems and what would sort of prevents people from doing that in terms of, curiosity only as to a certain very small fragment of their lives, or of course the habits of routine and inertia and laziness, which plagues everybody pretty much most of the time. So I guess this is probably a good place to stop for today. We'll probably turn to some literature in the next couple of days just to give you a preview. But hope everyone is enjoying the video format, and we'll see you soon. Okay.